An alien princess took command in war. What she did shocked both sides. The human fleets, though smaller in number, had proven to be unpredictable, inventive, and relentless. The coalition of crowns, a grand empire of crystalline worlds led by centuries of tradition and strict rules, had grown frustrated. Their calculations had always assumed that war followed patterns, but humans seemed to follow none. Every battle brought new surprises, and every surprise left the coalition shaken. In the heart of the coalition, on the crystalline world of Lauren, the Council of Elders met in a grand hall filled with sparkling, refracted light that danced across the faces of the oldest and wisest leaders. For months, they had watched reports from the front lines with growing unease. Ships were being destroyed not because of overwhelming firepower, but because humans used the strange things that humans did: creative maneuvers, unpredictable timing, and a level of coordination that seemed almost chaotic but somehow worked. No amount of traditional strategy could stop them. Princess Valith sat quietly in the back of the council chamber, her hands folded in her lap. She was young by coalition standards, barely 30 cycles old, but she had grown up studying human history and behavior. She had watched their rise from scattered colonies to a formidable fleet. She had read every report, every intercepted transmission, and even the accounts from human diplomats who occasionally visited Lauren. She knew humans were clever, resilient, and stubborn. And she knew that if the coalition did not change, they would continue to lose. The council debated loudly, voices clashing like steel on steel. "We cannot continue to lose ships to a species that barely respects our rules," one elder said, his crystalline eyes glittering with anger. "Our formations are perfect, our weapons are advanced, yet the humans continue to exploit our weaknesses." Another elder, older and wiser, shook his head slowly. "It is not weakness that they exploit. It is our reliance on tradition. We assume that wars are fought according to pattern, but humans are not predictable. They act without pattern, yet their actions are effective." "They are different." Valith's attention sharpened. She had been waiting for this moment for years. When the elders paused, she spoke softly but firmly. "Perhaps what we need is not stronger weapons nor stricter rules. Perhaps what we need is someone who understands the humans. Someone who is willing to see beyond our traditions and try something new." A silence fell over the room. All eyes turned toward her. The idea was audacious, young, dangerous, but Valith did not falter. "I have studied them. I understand their strengths and weaknesses. I can predict their behavior in ways the Council cannot. If you want to change the course of this war, I am willing to lead the forces at the front." Murmurs spread through the council chamber. A princess commanding a fleet was not unheard of, but taking full control of the coalition's forces in the middle of a war was nearly impossible. It was dangerous, unprecedented, but the council had no better options. The humans had grown too strong, and the losses were too high. After hours of debate, the elders finally agreed. Valith would be given supreme command, not just as a ceremonial leader but with real authority to make strategic decisions, to change plans, and to act independently. Some of the council worried about the consequences, but Valith herself felt a calm determination. This was her chance to prove that the coalition could survive, and perhaps even thrive, by thinking differently. A week later, Valith arrived at the front lines. The war zone was a vast expanse of debris, destroyed ships, and floating asteroids. The coalition fleet was arrayed in its usual formations, disciplined and precise. Fleet commanders stood at their stations, surprised and uneasy at the sight of the young princess taking command. She did not wear the traditional ceremonial armor of a commander. Instead, she wore a practical suit, designed for efficiency, mobility, and communication. Her presence alone was enough to unsettle some of the older admirals who had been trained to expect strict hierarchy and adherence to rules. Valith did not waste time. She began by addressing the fleet directly through the communication channels. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority without arrogance. "I understand that many of you may doubt my experience," she said. "I do not command by tradition. I command by observation, by understanding, and by strategy that considers the enemy as an unpredictable force. Today, we will do something different. Today, we will pause. Today, we will listen." The humans on the other side of the battlefield were equally surprised. Their communications channels picked up the broadcast. At first, they assumed it was a trap. No enemy commander would voluntarily call a pause in the middle of a war. They prepared for deception, for ambush. But the message continued, inviting dialogue, offering a ceasefire, requesting communication without hostility. Both sides hesitated. The pause held. For hours, messages went back and forth. Humans tested the communication lines, probing for hidden threats. Valith responded carefully, answering questions, providing information about civilian populations at risk, and even admitting where the coalition's forces were vulnerable. It was unprecedented. A princess, an enemy, was trusting humanity enough to speak openly. Humans could hardly believe it. Within the coalition fleet, reactions were mixed. Some commanders were furious. They saw Valith's actions as foolish, dangerous, perhaps even treasonous. Others were curious. They had never seen someone willing to step outside the rigid rules that had governed war for centuries. Valith's calm confidence and her ability to anticipate human behavior began to sway even the skeptics. Slowly, the fleet began to adjust to her leadership, listening to her instructions, preparing for strategies that were adaptive rather than rigid. Valith's first major action was a subtle one. She did not order an attack. She did not reorganize formations immediately. Instead, she sent small reconnaissance units closer to human territory, not for destruction but to observe. She studied their ships, their maneuvers, and their responses to unexpected challenges. Every action she took was measured, designed to learn rather than to dominate. Humans noticed. They saw the careful observation, the restraint, and the intelligence behind each movement. They could not read Valith's thoughts fully, but they sensed her respect for their capabilities. It was unsettling. Usually, enemies treated humans as obstacles, not as worthy opponents with their own ingenuity. Valith's approach was different, almost thoughtful. Days passed. The pause allowed both sides to breathe. Fleet commanders on the coalition side began to see the patterns in human behavior that Valith had studied for years. Small decisions, minor maneuvers, improvisations on the battlefield. They all revealed a logic that could be predicted if one approached it without fear or arrogance. Valith started teaching these insights to her officers, explaining why humans acted the way they did and how the coalition could adapt without breaking their own principles. Slowly, the fleet began to operate in a new way, more flexible, more responsive, and surprisingly effective. Meanwhile, human commanders held secret meetings to discuss this strange development. Was it a trap, or had the enemy simply changed? They could not decide. Valith did not attack. She did not exploit weaknesses. She seemed curious, respectful, intelligent. Her actions were unsettling because they broke every assumption humans had about their enemies. They did not know whether to trust her, fight her, or prepare for something even stranger. Valith herself felt a quiet satisfaction. The first step had been taken. Both sides were watching. Both sides were learning. She had not yet won a battle, but she had changed the rules of engagement in ways that no one expected. In a war defined by destruction, she had created a space for understanding, observation, and adaptation. It was dangerous, but it was necessary. By the end of the first week at the front, Valith made another bold decision. She ordered a controlled withdrawal from a contested system, a move that stunned the coalition fleet. Normally, surrendering territory was unthinkable. The elders on Lauren would have considered it treason. But Valeth had calculated that humans would treat the withdrawal as a test, a sign of the enemy's approach to strategy. She wanted to see how humans would respond, how they would handle responsibility, and how they would treat the civilians who had lived under coalition control. Humans, for their part, were cautious but respectful. They occupied the system without exploiting it, stabilized civilian life, and repaired what the war had broken. Valeth observed silently, analyzing their decisions, their morals, and their discipline. She took notes. She learned. She prepared to act not as an enemy, but as a commander who understood that war was more than destruction. It was about intelligence, observation, and adaptability. By the end of the first part of this new campaign, something remarkable had happened. Humans and the coalition were no longer simply enemies. They were participants in a subtle, unspoken test of understanding. Valeth had not yet revealed her full strategy, but she had already achieved something rare. She had shocked both sides by acting in a way no one had predicted. She had demonstrated that leadership was not just about firepower, hierarchy, or rules. It was about vision, intelligence, and courage, the courage to act differently, even in the face of doubt and fear. For the first time in decades, both fleets paused not out of fear but out of curiosity. The war had not ended, but it had changed. The future would be uncertain. But one thing was clear. Princess Valeth, young, thoughtful, and fearless, had begun to redefine what war could mean. And the galaxy was watching, waiting for what she would do next. Days passed after Princess Valeth's daring decision to communicate with the humans. The pause in fighting had allowed both sides to breathe, but the war was far from over. Within the coalition fleet, murmurs spread like wildfire. Some commanders whispered about Valeth's audacity, claiming that she had abandoned centuries of tradition and risked the safety of countless lives. Others quietly admired her insight, recognizing the brilliance in her careful observation and subtle strategies. Despite the tension, the fleet continued to follow her orders because every move she made seemed to reduce unnecessary losses and increase efficiency. Valeth had spent hours studying the humans' responses to her controlled withdrawal. Every decision they made, every repair, every tactical maneuver, every choice to protect civilians instead of exploiting the system was carefully analyzed. She began to understand something crucial. Humans were not merely fighting to win battles. They were fighting to survive, to protect, and to outthink their enemies. Their strength lay not in sheer power, but in their intelligence, their flexibility, and their ability to work together in ways that were unexpected and unpredictable. The princess called her senior officers together. The room was quiet, filled with holographic maps of human fleets, coalition movements, and contested systems. Valeth's eyes scanned the room as she began to speak. Our enemy is unlike any we have faced before. They do not act according to pattern, nor do they rely solely on strength. Every action is calculated, yet unpredictable. To defeat them, we must understand them fully. We cannot rely on tradition, and we cannot underestimate them. We must adapt. Some officers shifted uneasily in their seats. They were trained to follow orders, not question them, and certainly not to act in ways that broke centuries of military doctrine. But Valeth's confidence was undeniable. She outlined a strategy that would shake the coalition to its core, a decentralized command structure. Instead of relying on strict hierarchies, officers at all levels would be empowered to make real-time decisions based on the situation. Fleet formations could be changed instantly, maneuvers could be adjusted without waiting for approval, and individual captains were encouraged to observe human behavior and respond accordingly. "It is risky," one admiral said quietly. "We have never operated this way before." "How can we ensure discipline?" Valeth's eyes were steady. "Discipline is not always about obedience. Discipline is about understanding and responsibility. If every officer knows the goal, understands the enemy, and trusts their judgment, the fleet will act as one, without the rigidity that has cost us so many ships. Her officers were skeptical but willing to try. The first test came sooner than expected. Scouts reported that a human fleet was approaching a contested system, far larger than expected and far more organized than predicted. Coalition commanders debated whether to attack immediately, but Valith refused. Instead, she ordered her forces to hold position and observe. For hours, the humans maneuvered through the system, repairing damaged satellites, establishing supply lines, and protecting civilian outposts. Valith watched intently, noting how humans prioritized efficiency, communication, and adaptation. Every move they made revealed not weakness, but a unique kind of intelligence. Finally, Valith issued her next order. A small strike group would approach the human fleet, not to attack, but to test their responses. The group moved carefully, staying within sensor range while maintaining a non-aggressive posture. As expected, the humans noticed, but they did not panic or attack immediately. Instead, they adapted. They formed protective patterns around vulnerable ships, reinforced their weaker vessels, and created countermeasures that even the coalition scouts had not anticipated. Valith smiled quietly. This was exactly what she had hoped for. The humans were not predictable, but their actions followed a logic that could be understood and anticipated if one was patient and observant. She relayed the findings to her fleet, explaining how each human decision reflected priorities, values, and strategies. Slowly, officers began to adjust, adopting new maneuvers, flexible formations, and creative tactics that incorporated both coalition technology and lessons learned from human behavior. The shift was noticeable. The coalition fleet moved with a new rhythm, more adaptable and responsive than ever before. Human commanders, observing from afar, were surprised to see the enemy adjusting in real time, responding to situations with a level of flexibility that mirrored their own. They could sense the intelligence guiding the enemy, not a mindless force, but a leader who understood them. Valith's next move was even bolder. She ordered a controlled withdrawal from another contested system, one that was considered strategically vital. Many officers protested, arguing that the humans would take advantage of the surrender. Valith shook her head. This is not surrender. This is observation. We must see how they respond to responsibility. Do they exploit power or do they act with restraint? Their choices will teach us more than any battle ever could. The humans occupied the system carefully. They repaired infrastructure, protected civilians, and avoided aggressive actions. Valith studied every decision, noting not just what humans did, but why. Their morality, their ingenuity, and their cooperation impressed her. She began to see a pattern. Humans were not just fighters, they were strategists, protectors, and problem solvers. Meanwhile, tensions within the coalition began to rise. Some commanders could not understand Valith's methods. They saw her actions as reckless and feared she was giving the humans an advantage. Rumors of rebellion began to spread, whispers of disobedience and treason. Valith was aware of the growing dissent, but she did not waver. Leadership, she knew, required patience, vision, and courage. She continued to explain her decisions clearly, showing the fleet the benefits of adaptation and observation. The next challenge came when a rogue faction within the coalition launched an unauthorized attack. They struck a lightly defended human convoy, violating the temporary ceasefire. Valith was furious but calm. She immediately warned the human fleet of the attack, providing exact coordinates, enemy strength, and potential escape routes. It was a shocking move. No commander had ever given intelligence to the enemy, even partially, during war. Humans were cautious but grateful. With Valith's guidance, they were able to intercept the rogue ships and protect the convoy. The battle was small in scale, but it was a turning point. Both sides saw the potential of cooperation and trust, even amidst war. Humans realized that Valith was not just an enemy, she was a strategist who valued life, intelligence, and restraint. Coalition officers realized that her leadership was effective because it combined strength with wisdom, flexibility with clarity. Valith did not stop there. She began to train her officers in human-style strategy, teaching them to think creatively, to anticipate unpredictability, and to make independent decisions. Simulations were run to test their adaptability. Officers learned to communicate quickly, to recognize patterns, and to value initiative over blind obedience. Slowly, the fleet transformed. What had once been rigid, predictable, and slow became dynamic, responsive, and innovative. The humans noticed the change in the enemy. Their sensors picked up new maneuvers, faster responses, and clever adaptations that mirrored human thinking. For the first time, they felt a strange respect for the coalition fleet. It was no longer a mindless enemy. It was a force led by a mind that understood them, challenged them, and learned from them. Valith herself felt a quiet satisfaction. Her plan was unfolding exactly as she had hoped. By choosing observation over aggression, by prioritizing understanding over destruction, she had begun to shift the course of the war. Humans and the coalition were still enemies, but the rules had changed. Both sides were learning, adapting, and testing each other in ways that had never been imagined. The week ended with a daring operation. Valith ordered a joint maneuver between her loyal officers and a small human fleet, not for battle, but for demonstration. They coordinated movements around a neutral asteroid field, testing communication, timing, and adaptability. The humans and the coalition officers followed her instructions, adjusting to unexpected changes, improvising solutions, and completing the operation with precision. It was a remarkable success. Both sides were astonished. The humans realized that the enemy could think like them, adapt like them, and even respect them. Coalition officers realized that Valith's leadership had unlocked potential within themselves they never knew existed. The experiment had proven a single truth. War was not just about strength. It was about intelligence, trust, and the willingness to act differently when necessary. As Valith looked out from the bridge of her command ship, she understood that the true battle had only just begun. The humans had shown their resilience and intelligence. The coalition fleet had begun to transform under her guidance, and the galaxy was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The princess had not yet struck a single major blow in battle, but she had achieved something far greater. She had changed the way both sides saw each other. The war was no longer a simple contest of firepower and numbers. It was now a test of strategy, morality, and the courage to act differently. Valith knew that the coming months would challenge her in ways she could not yet imagine. Rogue factions, human ingenuity, and the vast unpredictability of space would all test her leadership. But she was ready. She had begun to teach the galaxy a lesson. Victory did not always belong to the strongest or the most numerous. Sometimes it belonged to the one who could understand, adapt, and act with courage when others could not. And in that understanding, Valith saw the future of the war, and perhaps even the future of peace. The quiet days of observation and careful maneuvers were suddenly shattered. Reports came in from the outer sectors that a rogue faction of the coalition had launched an unsanctioned attack. Their ships were moving fast, striking at unprotected human supply lines and civilian outposts. This faction had ignored all orders and the temporary ceasefire established by Princess Valith. The news sent a ripple of alarm through her fleet. Valith stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the holomap display flicker with incoming transmissions. Her face was calm, but her mind worked rapidly. She understood immediately that this was more than a simple skirmish. The rogue faction had the power to destabilize the fragile understanding she had worked so hard to build. If the humans were caught unprepared, countless lives would be lost. And if her fleet acted recklessly, the fragile trust she had cultivated could vanish in an instant. She called her senior officers to the bridge. "This rogue faction has broken our ceasefire," she said. "They are targeting civilians and supply lines. If we allow this to continue, the consequences will be catastrophic. We will act, but we will act wisely." An admiral stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. "We should strike immediately. Crush them before they reach the humans. They are traitors to our empire and threats to us all." Valith shook her head. "No, immediate aggression will kill innocents and give the humans reason to mistrust us. Instead, we will warn them. We will provide intelligence. We will act with precision. The rogue faction will not see us as an enemy, but as a force they cannot escape." It was a bold and dangerous move. Sharing intelligence with humans, giving them exact coordinates, attack vectors, and estimates of enemy strength was unprecedented. Many officers whispered that she was risking treason, that she was endangering the coalition itself. But Valith was confident. She had studied humans too long to ignore their ability to respond wisely. They would not waste this knowledge. The message went through secure channels. Human commanders received the warning, initially skeptical. It seemed impossible that an enemy fleet would willingly provide critical information. They double-checked the details, preparing for deception, but the intelligence proved accurate. When the rogue faction appeared on sensors, their movements matched the predictions precisely. Valith watched as the humans adapted. They split their fleet into rapid response units, creating protective formations around vulnerable ships and evacuating civilians in areas under threat. Coalition officers were astonished at the speed, organization, and creativity of the human response. Ships moved in patterns that were unpredictable, yet highly effective, countering the rogue fleet without unnecessary loss. Valith coordinated her loyal forces with the humans, directing precise strikes that minimized casualties. Coalition ships used defensive barriers, electronic interference, and careful positioning rather than sheer firepower. Humans adapted in real time, improvising when unexpected threats arose and coordinating perfectly with Valith's fleet. The first confrontation was intense. Rogue ships attacked with full force, expecting chaos and confusion. Instead, they encountered a coordinated, adaptive defense that was far beyond what they anticipated. Loyal coalition ships blocked escape routes, human ships countered electronic attacks, and the rogue fleet found itself trapped in a network of precision and intelligence. Princess Valith observed quietly, her mind calculating every move. She understood that victory did not lie in destruction alone. Every maneuver was designed to protect life, disable threats, and restore order without creating further chaos. The rogue faction's arrogance was their undoing. They assumed that humans and coalition forces could never coordinate. Valith proved them wrong. Hours passed. Battles flared and subsided, each engagement carefully controlled. Valith communicated constantly with both human and coalition commanders, adjusting strategies, predicting enemy maneuvers, and responding to unexpected developments. Her calm, methodical leadership was like a guiding force, keeping both sides synchronized and focused. The rogue faction was desperate. Their ships were powerful and numerous, but they lacked coordination and foresight. Every attempt to escape or strike back was countered by careful prediction and flexible response. Valith's use of human intelligence had tipped the balance. Their reliance on brute force was no match for the combination of human creativity and coalition discipline working in unison. By the second day, the rogue faction had lost significant numbers of ships and supplies. Valith did not allow unnecessary destruction. Damaged ships were isolated, surrounded, and forced to surrender. Civilians caught in the conflict were rescued. Humans treated the captured rogue soldiers with surprising restraint, following Valith's guidance. The coalition officers, watching closely, were impressed and uneasy. They had expected humans to exploit weakness and show no mercy. Instead, humans showed intelligence, discipline, and morality. During a temporary lull in the fighting, Valith called a meeting with her officers. "The humans have proven themselves once again," she said. "They are not just adaptable. They are disciplined, resourceful, and capable of cooperation in ways we did not anticipate. This is why I chose to act with precision, not aggression. Victory is not measured by destruction alone, but by the preservation of life and the demonstration of intelligence." The officers listened, some nodding, others frowning, still struggling to understand her methods, but the results were undeniable. Coalition forces were more efficient, human forces were coordinated, and the rogue faction had begun to break apart. Valith had demonstrated that a war could be fought differently, strategically, intelligently, and morally, without sacrificing effectiveness. The final phase of the operation came when the rogue faction attempted a desperate maneuver, a massive strike aimed at a civilian system protected jointly by humans and coalition loyalists. Valith acted immediately. Using her network of scouts, communications, and adaptive fleet movements, she orchestrated a counterstrike that trapped the rogue fleet in a narrow asteroid field. Human and coalition ships moved together, covering all escape routes while avoiding collateral damage. The rogue faction's heavy weapons could not be fired safely without risking their own ships. Panic spread among their commanders. Some attempted to surrender, others tried to escape individually, but Valith's coordination left no room for success. One by one, rogue ships were disabled or captured. When the battle ended, casualties were surprisingly low. Civilians were unharmed, the rogue fleet was neutralized, and human and coalition forces had worked together seamlessly. Valith allowed humans to take the lead in evacuations and repairs, reinforcing the trust she had built. For the first time in decades, humans and coalition loyalists had operated as partners rather than enemies. The victory sent a shockwave through the coalition fleet. Officers who had doubted Valith now saw her brilliance. Her combination of intelligence, patience, and courage had not only saved lives, but had also transformed the fleet's approach to warfare. She had proven that leadership could be more than orders and obedience. It could be vision, collaboration, and strategic understanding. Humans, too, were astonished. They had expected hostility, trickery, or betrayal. Instead, they found an ally in the most unlikely form, a princess of the enemy empire, risking her reputation, her authority, and her very life to ensure the survival of both sides. They could not help but respect her. In many ways, they realized that Valith represented a new kind of leadership, one that valued intelligence and morality as much as firepower. The aftermath of the rogue attack was filled with analysis, repair, and reflection. Coalition officers trained under Valith's guidance, practicing adaptive strategies and learning to anticipate unpredictability. Human commanders shared knowledge, improving coordination, tactics, and defensive measures. Together, they created a new model of warfare, one that combined human ingenuity with coalition discipline, and intelligence with morality. Valith herself spent long hours reviewing every move, every decision, and every result. She knew that the rogue faction's defeat was only the beginning. There were still threats in the galaxy, unpredictable forces that could disrupt fragile alliances, and challenges that would test the courage and intelligence of both humans and the coalition. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She walked through the command decks, observing officers at work. Humans and coalition personnel shared duties, coordinated operations, and discussed strategy openly. The bridge was alive with energy, a mix of curiosity, respect, and determination. Valith watched quietly, knowing that she had achieved something remarkable. She had created a force that was not only powerful but also capable of thinking, learning and acting together. At night, when the stars stretched endlessly across the viewports, Valith allowed herself to reflect on the lessons of the past days. She had learned that trust was a powerful weapon, that observation could be stronger than aggression, and that understanding the enemy could turn potential destruction into collaboration. Humans were clever, resourceful, and moral in ways that were sometimes difficult to comprehend, but they had proven themselves time and again. And yet, Valith knew the future would be even more challenging. The rogue faction had been only a small test of coordination and intelligence. Larger threats were still out there, and the war was far from over. But she also knew that the greatest strength she had discovered was not in ships or weapons, it was in people. Humans and coalition officers, when united, could achieve far more than either side could alone. She returned to her private quarters, a small space filled with light and quiet. She allowed herself a moment to rest, to plan, and to prepare for the next phase of the campaign. Her mind was alive with possibilities, calculations, and strategies. She thought of the humans, their ingenuity, their morality, and their courage. She thought of her fleet, adapting and learning in ways that had once been impossible. For the first time in her life, Valith felt that true leadership was not about authority, titles, or obedience. It was about vision, courage, intelligence, and the willingness to act differently when others could not. The galaxy was changing, and she was at the center of that change. As she gazed out at the stars, Valith understood something profound. The war was no longer simply about victory or defeat. It was about understanding, collaboration, and the potential for a new kind of future. One in which humans and coalition forces could work together, not just to fight, but to create a galaxy where intelligence, morality, and courage could guide the path forward. And so, the war continued, not as a series of battles to be won or lost, but as a test of strategy, understanding, and the courage to act wisely when the galaxy itself seemed to demand chaos. Princess Valith knew that the true challenge lay ahead, but she was ready. The humans had shown their strength. Her fleet had begun to transform. And together, they would face whatever the universe could throw at them, intelligently, strategically, and with courage that neither side had expected. The galaxy seemed quieter after the defeat of the rogue faction, but Princess Valith knew that the war was far from over. The conflict had shifted, no longer a simple contest of firepower or numbers. It had become a battle of strategy, understanding, and intelligence. Both the humans and the loyal coalition forces had proven their ability to act with coordination, restraint, and creativity. But Valith also understood that true tests were still ahead. Intelligence reports indicated that the rogue faction had splintered into smaller groups. Some were attempting to regroup and form alliances with distant warlords who had long remained neutral. Others were raiding undefended systems, hoping to destabilize the galaxy before Valith could react. It was clear that one final, decisive operation was necessary to restore order and prevent further destruction. Valith called her commanders together once more. The war room was filled with humans and coalition officers, working side by side for the first time on a unified strategy. Holographic maps floated in the air, displaying ship movements, planetary systems, and supply lines. Valith addressed the room, her voice calm but commanding. The rogue faction still threaten countless lives. If we act recklessly, we will create more chaos. But if we act wisely, we can end this war decisively and ensure a future where humans and the coalition can work together. Our strength lies not just in ships or weapons, but in intelligence, coordination, and courage. The plan she outlined was bold and unprecedented. Instead of attacking all rogue forces at once, Valith proposed a coordinated series of targeted strikes, using both coalition and human fleets in small, highly adaptable groups. Each group would have autonomy to react to unexpected developments, while staying connected through real-time communication and shared strategy. It was a plan that relied on trust, intelligence, and adaptability, a combination that neither side had attempted in decades of war. Human commanders were impressed. They had fought together with the coalition before, but never on this scale, never with such precision and mutual understanding. Coalition officers were cautious, wary of failure, but Valith's confidence inspired them. They had seen her strategies work in observation, in the rogue faction's defeat, and in coordination exercises. Now, the ultimate test lay ahead, to see if humans and the coalition could act as one against a decentralized enemy that could strike unpredictably across multiple systems. The first engagement began near a system known for its dense asteroid fields. Rogue ships had established a base there, hoping that the natural obstacles would prevent any coordinated attack. Valith divided the combined forces into multiple squads, assigning human and coalition officers to lead each group. Each squad moved with precise timing, using the asteroid field as cover while remaining prepared for sudden attacks. As the rogue ships emerged, expecting a chaotic rush, they were met with disciplined, adaptive forces. Humans anticipated unpredictable maneuvers, while coalition ships used coordinated firepower to block escape routes. Valith herself directed one of the squads remotely, adjusting their movements in real time, predicting enemy actions, and ensuring that the civilians in nearby settlements remained safe. The battle was intense but carefully controlled. Rogue ships tried to break the formation, relying on speed and brute force, but each attempt was countered with intelligence, flexibility, and quick adaptation. Coalition officers were surprised at how well the humans coordinated, how quickly they improvised solutions, and how their moral sense guided their actions, ensuring minimal destruction while maximizing effectiveness. By the end of the first engagement, the rogue fleet had suffered heavy losses. Several ships surrendered rather than be destroyed. Civilians were unharmed. The humans and coalition forces had acted not as enemies but as partners, their movements perfectly synchronized. Valith observed the results with quiet satisfaction. She had anticipated success, but seeing it unfold so flawlessly exceeded even her expectations. The operation continued over several days. Rogue factions scattered across multiple systems, attempting to regroup, but each time they were met with small, adaptive squads of humans and coalition ships. Valith used her intelligence network to predict their movements, providing both sides with real-time updates. The humans adapted quickly, adjusting tactics and forming protective patterns for civilians. Coalition officers, once rigid and hierarchical, began to trust the decisions of human commanders and junior officers alike. Throughout the campaign, Valith emphasized restraint. She did not want to destroy rogue forces completely. She wanted to neutralize them while preserving life and demonstrating the power of coordination and strategy. Every captured ship, every surrendered faction became a lesson in the value of intelligence, trust, and adaptability. In the midst of this campaign, Valith made her boldest decision yet. She called for a direct meeting with human commanders in a neutral system, using secure communication channels. There, she proposed a permanent alliance, not as equals under one empire, but as partners in maintaining peace and order across the galaxy. Humans were stunned. No enemy commander, no matter how strategic, had ever offered such a proposal. Some were skeptical, fearing deception, but Valith's record of restraint, intelligence, and cooperation convinced them to hear her out. The meeting was tense but productive. Valith explained her vision: a galaxy where human ingenuity and coalition discipline could work together to prevent chaos, protect civilizations, and maintain stability. She admitted that the traditional coalition command structures had failed, that humans had outmatched them in adaptability, and that cooperation was the only way forward. Humans, in turn, shared their perspectives on morality, efficiency, and problem-solving, helping Valith refine her strategies. The alliance, though fragile, began to take shape. Humans and coalition officers coordinated final strikes against remaining rogue factions. Each operation combined intelligence, strategy, and moral consideration. Rogue forces were gradually eliminated or absorbed into the new system of cooperation. Civilian populations were protected. Resources were preserved. The war, once expected to rage endlessly, began to wind down. As the final rogue stronghold prepared to surrender, Valith directed the operation personally. The fleet approached a large, fortified asteroid station where the last rogue commanders had gathered. She sent a precise warning, detailing the capabilities of her fleet and offering surrender terms that ensured safety for all civilians and lower-ranking officers. The rogue commanders, now isolated and outmaneuvered, had no choice but to comply. Ships were disabled without destruction, prisoners were taken without unnecessary casualties, and civilians were evacuated. Humans and coalition forces worked side by side, ensuring a smooth transition of control. Valith's leadership had turned what could have been a bloody, devastating battle into a decisive, controlled, and humane conclusion. When the final rogue ship surrendered, a wave of relief and awe swept through the fleet. Coalition officers finally understood the genius of Valith's approach. It was not brute force or hierarchy that won the war, but intelligence, courage, and cooperation. Humans, too, were astonished. They had expected hostility, traps, or betrayal, but instead had found an ally who valued understanding and restraint above all else. Valith addressed both fleets through a shared communication channel. Her voice was calm, commanding, and filled with conviction. "The war is over," she said. "Not because one side destroyed the other, but because we have learned that cooperation, intelligence, and courage can achieve what firepower alone cannot. Humans have proven their strength, morality, and ingenuity. The coalition has learned to adapt, to trust, and to act with flexibility. Together, we have shown that the galaxy can be shaped not by destruction, but by understanding and strategy." For the first time in decades, the galaxy seemed to breathe. Ships floated in formation without firing weapons. Civilians on planets and stations could rebuild in peace. Communications were no longer filled with warnings, orders, or alerts. They were filled with coordination, planning, and hope. Valith knew that this was only the beginning of a new era. The rogue factions had been neutralized, but the galaxy would always face challenges, natural disasters, resource conflicts, and unpredictable threats. Yet she also knew that humans and the coalition, now working together, could face any challenge with intelligence, morality, and courage. The princess spent long hours reviewing the campaign. She noted every decision, every adaptation, every human strategy that had surprised her. She trained her officers to continue observing, learning, and improving. The fleet had transformed, not through fear, obedience, or tradition, but through understanding and trust. She had created a model of leadership that would endure far beyond her reign. Humans returned to their colonies, carrying with them a newfound respect for the coalition and for Princess Valith herself. Stories spread throughout human fleets and settlements about the princess who had shocked both sides by acting with intelligence, restraint, and courage. She was not merely a commander. She had become a symbol of what leadership could mean in a galaxy too often defined by war. Coalition officers also carried the lessons forward. They had seen firsthand that tradition and hierarchy could be limiting. They had learned the power of adaptability, trust, and morality in action. Valith had not only won the war, she had reshaped the understanding of what it meant to lead. In private moments, Valith reflected on her journey. She had begun as a young princess, underestimated by elders and officers alike. She had studied humans for years, learning their strengths, weaknesses, and morals. She had acted boldly, communicated openly, and trusted those who had seemed like enemies. In doing so, she had transformed a war that could have lasted centuries into a decisive, humane, and intelligent conclusion. The galaxy was quiet now, but Valeth knew it was a quiet built on understanding, courage, and intelligence. Humans and coalition officers would carry forward the lessons of cooperation, observation, and strategic thinking. They would remember that war could be fought differently, that intelligence and morality could triumph over chaos and destruction. Valeth looked out at the stars, seeing the countless worlds that had been affected by the war. She felt a sense of pride, not in victories, not in destroyed ships, not in power, but in the fact that she had changed the way both humans and her own people thought about war, leadership, and intelligence. The galaxy had been shocked, but in that shock, a new era had begun. The humans had proven themselves, the coalition had transformed, and Valeth had shown the universe that true strength lay not in domination, but in understanding, courage, and the willingness to act wisely when others could not. The war was over, but its lessons would endure. And in those lessons, the galaxy found hope, respect, and a future shaped by intelligence and cooperation rather than fear and destruction. An alien princess took command in war. What she did shocked both sides.